Thank you so much, Gina, and everybody welcome. I've been chatting you up already, but welcome to getting involved in ACRL. I did go ahead and turn my camera off because I can't look at a picture of me and talk at the same time. I just can't do it. But this is your entryway into how to volunteer your service for ACRL, and it is brought to you by the Association of College and Research Libraries Membership Committee. I'm glad to see so many of you here today. I'm Rachel Minkin, and I'm head of reference services here at Michigan State University in very great East Lansing, Michigan, but it is lovely here. I'm a member of the team that's monitoring today's presentation, and I'm also a past chair of this committee. Just a brief moment on the logistics. As you know, some of it already. Gina Parsons-Diamond, Gina's been chatting with you all along. She's going to continue to provide some technical service for us. So if you're having an issue, go ahead and chat in that chat box and she'll see you. We're going to go approximately an hour, and that is going to include some time for you to ask questions. Go ahead and type your question in the chat box, making sure that you send it to all panelists and attendees so we can all see your questions. And then we'll try to either answer them as we go or we'll save room at the end. We will be recording this session, and that's to make it available to you later. And we have some folks who maybe aren't able to come onto the call at this time. The meeting is really big, so we've gone ahead and muted you. But again, we have that chat box going. There will be an evaluation at the end of this webcast so that we can ask your assistance in helping us tweak and perfect this for our next time that we run this presentation. And then finally, if you have any questions after this session closes, you can send them to us here, to anybody who is on this team, or you can send them to Mary Jane Petrosky at mpetrosky@ala.org or to our chair of our membership committee. And we'll talk more about that at the end. So we do have a pretty full agenda today. As you can see, we're going to do lots of things. But overall, today's session is intended to make the ACRL appointment process more transparent. And that's more transparent to new ACRL members and also those folks who've been maybe a member but haven't volunteered as much as they had hoped that they would. So we want to get you more involved. We've got lots of great panelists today. We've got Karen Monroe, who's our ACRL president. We have Peter Hepburn, who is our past chair for Community and Junior College Libraries section. He's also a member of the ACRL 2021 Conference Roundtable Discussion Committee. We've got our friend Mary Snyder, who's a convener for the ACRL Librarianship in For-Profit Educational Institutions Interest Group. And then our friend Wrapup, who's a convener for the ACRL International Perspective Discussion Group, a convener for the ACRL Leadership Discussion Group, and a member of the 2021 Conference Innovations Committee. Lots of great people. Just a little overview as we get started. There's so many of you who out there who are interested in serving on ACRL committees, and we've got lots of options out there. So we have over 50 divisional level committees, and these are committees that report up through the board of directors, and they're dedicated to advancing sort of that strategic plan of ACRL. We have over 300 section committees, and those committees kind of feed back into about 15 different sections, but of those 15, they spread way out. We've got approximately 17 discussion group conveners. We need, 17 group conveners every year for those discussion groups, and then another almost 20, about 18 for interest groups as well. And then on top of it all, we have ACRL chapters through many of our states, and those are independent entities, but they also have volunteer opportunities. So there's lots of ways that you can get involved. Now we are on a bit of a timeline when we're looking for our ACRL volunteers. So for us, you can see, we've opened up that volunteer link. So that opened up just at the beginning of December, and it continues through mid-February. So in this time frame, you can go into that form and start to fill it out, work on it. The ACRL vice president and section vice chairs will begin to make appointments based on what that information is from that mid-February point through April of 2020. The volunteers then will begin those terms starting in July of 2020, so July 1. And you can read a little bit more about that at the link that we have highlighted there. It's under Connect, Contribute, and Collaborate, Volunteer for Division and Section Committees and Editorial Boards. And we're going to talk more about this as well, so you don't need to write this down necessarily, but you know that it's there. Now, there are some things that I have to remind you of. Each committee service is limited, as you can see, to about 5 years of consecutive service. We want to make sure that folks have time and that we're circulating through. We don't want you to have more than 3 committees at one time because we want you to be able to focus and dig deep as you go. We have about 1,800 volunteer opportunities, but our appointments are staggered. So it's not that we open up all 1,800 every single year. About 500 open up every single year. We are also, as we're appointing you, we send you an email that you need to positively reply to. So until we get that message back from you saying, yes, I accept, you're not really there. So make sure you accept that appointment. And as always, if you have difficulty logging into that volunteer form, please check on your membership status. It may be that you just need to re-up for the year, and you just have to do that by calling the number there, and they will talk you through that. We get, as the form starts to close, gets close to closing in mid-February, we get a ton of email talking about how I can't register, I can't get in there. And most of the time, that's what it is. So just keep a little link on, an eyeball on that. So with that, all of sort of that overview, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Monroe. And Karen, if you're there, I'm going to have you hop on in.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for that introduction. And I will take a few minutes and start walking folks through what it looks like to volunteer for the division level, ACRL level committees. I will say, first of all, that I'm in a hotel room in beautiful Washington, D.C. I'm at the CNI conference right now, and I'm taking quick breaks. So I'm going to have to run after I do my part of the webinar today. So won't be here the whole time. I'm sorry for that, but I'm glad I get to be here in the first place. So I am, as mentioned and is on the screen there, my name's Karen Monroe. I am Associate Dean of the Library's Learning and Research at Simon Fraser University, which is in Canada, and I am currently ACRL President. I personally have been involved in ACRL in the instruction section and in the literatures and English section. That's where I got my start, as well as in ACRL conference planning committees and in chapter work as well. So I'm really glad that there's going to be some broad coverage today for all the different ways you can get involved with ACRL. Okay, I think next slide maybe. Great, thank you. So I'm here today really to give you some ideas about how you can get involved with ACRL level, division level committees. We'll take a look at the volunteer form together so that you're familiar with what that looks like. And I'll also use that as a springboard to talk a little bit about how you could best approach volunteering in ACRL and what you could expect from that process overall. Before I say anything else, I just want to say as one sort of very high level piece of advice or suggestion is just to consider your workload as you're thinking about serving on a committee, especially if you're putting your hand up for something like a chair or vice chair position, which could mean a little more work. That's just, I think, good advice for any new commitment, but just something to remind everybody about. And as we just heard, there are more members than spots, more volunteers than spots every year. So that means there is an element of competition, at least for getting that committee member role. So we'll talk a bit more about what that means, but I also just want to reiterate, there's lots of other ways you can participate in ACRL. This is not the only way to be involved in the association. Next slide, please. I think we'll now take a look. Yeah, this is the ALA ACRL volunteer form. This is the form that you have to fill out for an appointment at the division level on a division level committee. Without this form, we don't have a way to offer you the appointment. So just this is sort of the nuts and bolts of things. Obviously, you also need to be a member of ACRL to serve on a division level committee. And I think what you'll notice here is that there was a nice red arrow, whoop, thank you, that points to the ACRL dropdown here. When you first go to this form, you'll see that it's ALA. That's the default on the dropdown. You have to change that to ACRL. And if you don't, you'll find the form confusing and you might get the wrong appointment. So just off the top, just remember to make that change. And that will mean that your form will be directed to the appropriate, it's the ACRL Appointments Committee that will review it first, and then the ACRL Vice President, President-elect. And now the next slide, please. So here's a reminder about the deadline, which is, I think, isn't that Valentine's Day? Yes, 2020. So it's a great day for the deadline to submit the form. You can see there's a bit of a heads up and a reminder here that the form is going to ask you to indicate the interest that you have in different division level committees. You might have some curiosity now about what those committees are. And I would say it's a very good idea to go to the ACRL website and look up the directory of leadership and look at some of those division level committees to get a sense of what they are, what they do. You'll also, you can see on this page, be asked some demographic questions as part of the volunteer form, and we'll say more about that in just a minute. So next slide. So I just mentioned the directory of leadership, and that you might know already that there are quite a number of division level committees within ACRL, and this is a nice list of them. So this is the part of the form where you would indicate which committees you're interested in. I mentioned you could go to the directory of leadership if you wanted a little more information. You could also go to ALA Connect and look up the committees there, where you should be able to find a little bit more in terms of minutes, agendas, announcements about programs, those kinds of things that committees are doing. You could also, you could always email the committee members, the chair and the vice chair in advance. People are generally friendly and willing to respond if you have questions about what the committee does. It's a very good idea to inform yourself a bit in advance about what the committees do before you fill out the form. On this, would you mind going back just one more? Yeah, on this screen, I would also highly recommend that you pick more than one committee if possible. You want to be genuine about your interests, but because of the somewhat competitive nature of the appointment process, it will improve your chances of getting an appointment for a committee if you're not just volunteering for one committee and one committee only. Because it was mentioned that there are staggered appointments, there might be one or two or just not very many positions available on that committee, and there's lots of people applying. So it ups your chances of getting an appointment if you indicate interest in more than one. Thanks. Next slide. Okay, so the next piece of the form is going to ask you about your experience, particularly education and experience, and your interests in general. We'll say more in just a minute about your experience and how that weighs into making appointments. But in the meantime, I just want to point out that this is an important piece of your application. You shouldn't leave this blank. But I would also counsel you not to write a novel here. You need to think about your audience. Remember, I like to say, remember Ranganathan. You want to save the time of the reader. You want to be concise and to the point when you're filling out this form. Provide the most relevant information that you can, because this form, the output of the form will go to the ACRL Appointments Committee, who will be reviewing hundreds of different volunteer applications. And they're going to have to use their time wisely, and they're going to be looking to see what your background is and what your interests are, and try to match you with the right volunteer appointment. Next slide, please. So last year we added a new set of demographic questions to the volunteer form, and that's what you're seeing in this slide here. This is part of our process for making the best possible appointments that we can. We use a wide range of criteria to make these appointments. You can find those criteria, we're transparent about them. You can find them at the ACRL volunteering page, which is it's probably easiest to Google ACRL volunteer criteria. You'll find it pretty much right away. Or you could, of course, follow up with a question if you need help with finding that page. The criteria that the Appointments Committee uses and that the Vice President, President-elect uses to follow up on these appointments include geographic diversity. So we try to have a committee represented from across the country or the continent. We might include Canada. We look for diversity in types of institutions. So we're looking for public and private, consortial or research institutions sometimes, community colleges. We want to be sure that we have lots of opportunity for community college members, and so on. So we're looking for diversity in terms of where people are working. We're looking for diversity in roles and duties. So we have folks who are coming from across different types of positions, and we're also balancing seniority and experience with people who are coming up and looking for growth opportunities. So we're looking to balance all of those criteria when we're making appointments. And then we're also, in keeping with ACRL's core commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, we've added these optional questions about volunteer demographics. What we're trying to do here is make sure that the appointments committee and the vice president, president-elect have all information that they need in order to make the best appointments that they can. And we are trying to be sure that we're offering leadership and service opportunities to members who have been traditionally not offered those opportunities in an equitable way. So you can find more information out about the core commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion on the ACRL website. That is a commitment that we've made across all of ACRL, so it permeates the work of every committee that you're on. So you should expect, if you are on an ACRL committee, that the work that you do will have some kind of an equity, diversity, inclusion component to it. This is part of what we're doing as well, just to be as transparent as possible, make the best appointments that we can, and also so that we can start to benchmark where we are and hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we're making equitable appointments. Okay, thanks. Next slide. The last slide here is a good reminder that you need to click submit. So you remember to submit your form. I think from a more holistic perspective, the best advice I might offer in terms of making that division level committee request is to understand the process, which you are already doing by attending this webinar, which is great. Take into account the reality of the numbers that are involved. So you have to remember that there are lots of people looking for these appointments. When you fill out the form, be specific about your interests. And I really advise you to be open to serving on more than one committee, just one. And more than anything, I would say get to know the people on the committees, on any of the committees you're interested in, however it makes sense for you to do. And if you are successful in being appointed to an ACRL committee, that's fantastic, great. If you aren't successful this time around, I really encourage you to come back and to volunteer again in future. And in the meantime, there's lots of ways that you can be involved in ACRL. There's free webinars, there's communities on ALA Connect that you can be part of. You're welcome to join meetings of any committee that are not actually designated as a closed meeting. A lot of committees are doing their work increasingly virtually, which makes it much easier for folks to join those committee meetings. You can, as I said, reach out to committee members or chairs, express your interest, start to get your name known a little bit, start to build your runway to get onto one of those committees. And of course, if you're active in other ways, if you're offering presentations at meetings and conferences, if you're publishing, that's another way that your name will start to be known and people will start to recognize your expertise and your interests. So good luck with the process. I hope this is helpful. And if you are successful in gaining an ACRL division level appointment, then I look forward to working with you, and I look forward to working with you in the profession either way.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to switch slides here to Peter Hepburn. Peter, would you introduce yourself to the nice folks? Oops.
Gladly, yes. So hi, everyone. I'm Peter Hepburn. I work at the College of the Canyons, which is a community college in the suburbs of Los Angeles. I've been a longtime ACRL member, having been a member for almost 20 years now. And since moving into community college work 7 years ago, I've been most heavily involved in the community and junior colleges library section, where I'm the past chair. So since I've been involved in various sections over the years, I'm hoping to give you some insight into getting involved at that level. Some of what you're going to hear from me is actually reiteration of what Karen just said, but taken down to the section level. So let's move to the next slide then. And the important question is, why should you participate in a section? And I have a couple of good reasons for you. First off, the sections are communities of library workers who have professional interests that are very closely aligned with each other. They're great places to connect with colleagues who have similar experiences in their libraries. And what I find most of all is that they're a terrific place for us to share our experiences and our knowledge and our resources. Secondly, though, and probably more important for what we're doing here, is it's easier to get involved in these more discrete parts of ACRL. There's a lot of available committees. As you saw, there's about 300 across all the sections and many other activities. And because the sections are smaller units of ACRL, it's often easier to volunteer and be appointed there. So let's move on to the volunteer form on the next slide. You are permitted to join as many ACRL sections as you like, and you can see the variety of sections on the page here. So what I would encourage you to do is check out the web pages for each one to find out what sort of activities each section is engaged in, whether that's conference programming, newsletters and blogs, listservs, or more. Also on this page, and the red arrow is pointing to it, you'll see a link to the volunteer form. And so one thing I always tell people is that if you want to become involved in the sections in ACRL and ALA as a whole, you have to submit the form. The people who do the appointments, as Karen pointed out, can't appoint you if they don't know that you're interested in those appointments. So moving to the next slide, great. There are multiple ways to get involved, though committee work is probably the most common or well known for all of us, and I'll circle back to that in a moment. But I want to point out other things as well. The sections do vary one from another, but discussion group and interest group conveners are always needed. It's also possible to be elected to the section executive committee as, say, a secretary or just a member at large. Or if you're brave and somewhat foolish like I was, and I say that endearingly, you might run for chair one day and have all that responsibility. But the most important thing is just be an active member. Contribute to the listservs, attend conference programs, show up for committee and governance meetings. All these things are open to you, and that you don't actually have to be a section member to participate in the activities of different sections. You're welcome to show up at any section's conference activities. So listen, ask questions where you can, and support the activities of the section. And then of course, there's the committee membership. So first and foremost, when we talk about the requirements and expectations, you have to be an ALA member, an ACRL member, and a member of the section in question. I mean, that seems kind of obvious, but in the past I've known people to volunteer, which is great, but they haven't yet joined the section, so we have to take care of that business. You will need to attend meetings. In my experience, much of the work is done virtually, but check with the committee chair if there's a committee you're interested in. And that committee chair can tell you about whether in-person work is required or not. And then if you are a member of a committee, be a member fully. Contribute and participate however you can and be part of the conversation taking place, which includes responding promptly to communications. On to the next slide then. For many committees, as mentioned, there usually is no conference attendance requirement. And in fact, I'd like to think of it as recommended instead of required. A lot of the committees, in fact, most of them probably do their work virtually, with section executive committees, local arrangement committees, and conference program planning committees being the typical exceptions. Also, committee chairs are often part of section executive committees, so it's often recommended that they attend conference. But again, it may not always be a requirement to do so. So check with the section chair, check with the committee chairs about attendance, whether it's recommended or required. Otherwise, though, many of the committees are able to accommodate members who can only participate virtually. On to the next slide then. And so there you'll see, you've sort of seen something like this before, but in this case, if you want to volunteer for a section after you log in, your section affiliations will display automatically. So you can get them from that drop down, and here it shows a member who wants to volunteer for the instruction section, which they belong to. Then on the next slide, you'll notice that there's no opportunity here to volunteer for every single committee within a section. And what you can do is you can check off every single box, and you're certainly welcome to, but there's nothing that just automatically volunteers you for every single one. As Karen pointed out, there's always going to be committees that are more popular than others, that are highly competitive, difficult to get on. But there are also committees that sometimes go begging for members, to be honest. And in the past, I've had to solicit more volunteers from the section membership. So like Karen did, I'm going to encourage you to check off as many as possible that are of interest to you, because some of them may be a less competitive, easier opportunity to jump on board into committee work. On to the next slide. When you fill out the committee form, be sure to let us know about you. What are your professional interests at work and within ACRL and ALA? What past experiences have you had? And then if you've had no experience in the past and want to get a toehold in ACRL, that's great, that's perfectly fine. The sections are actually a really terrific place to get a start on volunteering in ACRL and get you that sort of pathway then up to the division level committees. But once again, just make sure to tell us about your interests. And hey, if you don't get a committee you want this time, volunteer again and volunteer for other options as well. And then finally, committees are not the only way to get involved, as you can see. I mentioned one or two of these options earlier, but the best way to get involved is just simply to participate, whether that's in person or virtually or both, in whatever things the sections have to offer. So this ranges, as you see, from publications to social media, attending programs, and even things like informal gatherings that we have at conferences, socials, lunchtime gatherings, participation in discussion groups. The sections offer some terrific and really easy ways to get involved in smaller communities within ACRL, and all of us in the sections would be so glad to see any of you at our in-person or virtual events. We'd be glad to talk to you if you want to volunteer. And most of all, I thank you for the opportunity to talk about the sections. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, Peter Hepburn, at 661-362-3758. And I'm going to turn it back to Rachel and on to Mary.
Peter, thank you very, very much. And I'm going to introduce our friend Mary, or actually, Mary, would you introduce yourself to the group, please?
Sure. I am Mary Snyder. Snyder and I work at Schneider University, one of the oldest for-profit universities in our nation. We were founded in 1892 and we're one of the first universities, well, college in earlier days and school in earlier days, to admit women and also students of color. So, in light of DEI initiatives, that is very near and dear to our hearts about open access to education through open enrollment. So that's my little shtick about for-profit, since we do have an interest group, and I am here to chat about interest groups overall, but also to encourage any of you who happen to be at a for-profit institution to go ahead and join our group. I have been a member of ACRL for almost 10 years now, and this year is actually my first year officially volunteering for an interest group. So whereas we have members such as Peter on the call who have had many opportunities, I am happy to say that I am in the very beginning, just like you are, and happy to share my perspective. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Interest groups are a wonderful way, in my perspective, to get a peek in from afar. Every interest group is free to join when you renew your ACRL membership. So you're able to join as many as you wish. If you're not currently renewing and officially adding them to your membership, you also can join the SIMPA listserv. So we can drop a link to that, but ALA has their list of all of their listservs, and you're always able to find the listserv associated with an interest group that you're interested in to sort of get a peek and subscribe to sort of hear and see the chatter before you fully commit. If you choose to volunteer for a leadership role, it is a 3-year commitment. You actually, the first time you volunteer, you are the incoming convener, and there's always 3 leaders. So I sort of think of it, for my classics scholars out there, a triumvirate. Every interest group has 3 leaders. There's the incoming convener, the convener, and the past convener. So when you first volunteer your first year, you're the incoming convener. And then your second year, you're the convener, having learned from the incoming, having learned as incoming. And then in your third year, you are the past convener, ready to share knowledge and support the ones who have come after you. So really, when you sign up for an IG, you're really signing up for 3 years. Of course, if things change, you always can share that info, and then leadership changes can be made. That's perfectly all right. Something interesting about interest groups is that they are able to host conferences annually. Most often, I have seen that as virtual conferences, and they're free. And so the advantage of that is that, you know, with little, let's say, interruption to your workday, and at no cost to you, you can call in and listen in, or perhaps speak with others in your interest group on some very specialized topics related to your group without any travel time or travel costs, no registration costs. But also, because this is an interest group, almost everything will be likely of interest to you, because this is a subset of our, you know, structure. Every group hosts at least one event a year, whether it's virtual or in person, and the schedules change depending on the group. Some groups may hold, you know, weekly lunch and learns on every Friday. Some groups may save all of their effort and time in planning for a virtual conference. So everything is different depending on the group. It's also driven by the members of the group. I personally also find that interest groups are not only a great way to sort of peek into a topic, it's also a great way to practice presenting, moderating, leading discussions, because you're in a group of peers, you're in a group of those who are very highly interested in your topic, because you're all in this interest group. So just by the nature of that, right? But also because it may be a smaller meeting than, let's say, if you present at ALA and you have 100 people in the room. So there's less pressure. There's the peers around you to support and provide feedback. So wonderful reasons and ways that interest groups are a little different. I think the slides disappeared for me. Are they still visible for the others? No. Okay, let me see. I believe I can share my screen here. Just give me one moment. We might have lost Mary. Okay. Hold on one moment. Okay. Now, hopefully you should be able to see my screen with the lady in the black and white dress. If anyone could chat in.
Yep, Mary, you just gonna want to go into presenter mode.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Apparently I can't remember the desktop shortcut. I had thought it was F12, but maybe I'm wrong. There we go. Okay. Now, if you choose to join an interest group as a convener, so as a member of the leadership, that would have some responsibilities such as, you know, scheduling the meetings, sharing any documents with your staff liaison from ACRL. I'd also love to give a shout out to the liaisons for our group, LFPEI. We have Lauren Carlson, and Lauren is wonderful. As a first-time convener, Lauren has been a wonderful support. So even if you volunteer for something completely new, there is someone to always help you, whether it's a staff liaison, another member of the leadership. It's very, very supportive. Beyond submitting agendas and scheduling and such, you do participate in the plan for excellence each year. So whether that is goal setting or reporting back for accomplishments. There's also a COPA committee where you network with other leaders of interest groups and such. But ultimately, interest groups, we can be very flexible, very accommodating in how much or how little time, depending on the leadership triumvirate that you have, let's say. So now that I've shared so much about interest groups, and hopefully I've piqued your interest in them, here's a partial list. Just as Karen mentioned at the beginning, we have 18 interest groups presently, and this is a list of some of them, but you're able to see a full list on the ACRL leadership page. And for each list, you'll see, for each group, when you click on them, you'll see what their charge is. So their description. You'll also see who their leaders are and their names and contact info. So if you're just curious to reach out to say hello, it's a wonderful way to really connect with those in the roles that perhaps you may be interested in the future. So at this point, I'd like to pass the presentation over to my colleague, Ray. And we can also take a pause on who will be screen sharing, if it will continue to be me or if Mary's back with us.
It's actually me. It's Rachel. I'm back.
Rachel.
I'm sorry. Finals week here at MSU means occasionally we have intermittent outages, apparently. I heard some yelling from the quiet side of the building. But I am back, and I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Ray, if you'll give me just one moment.
Yeah, sure. As the slides are being transitioned. Yeah, and I just wanted to say thank you all for bearing with us with these technical changes. Like they were saying, I'm Ray Pun, the academic librarian out in Alder Graduate School of Education in the Bay Area in California. And in my work, I've supported ACRL in numerous ways. I've been a section member, different groups, as well as being on the Framework Advisory Board, as well as serving on the Standing Committee for the Student Learning and Information Literacy Committee. And right now serving as a conference committee member and 2 discussion groups, which we'll talk about the formations of discussion groups. So I like to think of the discussion groups like the interest groups. It's almost like the Russian doll setup we have. Like it's sort of like big, smaller, and kind of smaller. But in another way of looking at it, it's really grassroots oriented. Like we are just having different types of webinars, different types of meetings, and so forth. And it's very decentralized in a sense that it's open to all who's interested in participating. For the discussion groups, thank you, Rachel, for setting that up. It's, like I was saying, in very informal structure, no official membership. You can subscribe to the listservs, and we'll look at some of them in just a bit on what they are. For the conveners, and those are the ones leading the discussion groups, it's a 1-year commitment, and you can pass it to another or have co-conveners, and then usually there could be a transition in the spring. So if you're interested in serving in a discussion group as a convener, you'll see the call out usually in the spring, and meets at least once a year, either at the conference in person, midwinter or annual, or through webinars. And that's basically any time throughout the year. Do not sponsor annual conference programs, but the discussions usually generate a lot of different types of topics, right? So the ones I served on include the international perspective, where we've had speakers from Egypt, Sri Lanka, and just talking about different academic library experiences from that context. And also somebody who had done research in North Korea who had spoken in at ALA Annual as an open discussion. And of course, if it's not active, it dissolves. So you can learn more throughout the links. Next slide, please. So for those who are interested, the convener responsibilities include all of these listed here, really trying to create a community of practice, facilitating discussions, having a meeting topic in advance, and really moderating the email list. There's a lot of people who would like to join who are not necessarily part of ACRL community, but maybe within ALA. There's also the ALA ACRL Connect page, so you can also manage and monitor that. Of course, the whole idea is to facilitate discussions on that specific topic. Next slide, please. So here are the ones I had mentioned. These are the different types of discussion groups. They all have conveners or co-conveners, and it's really interesting to see some of them going ahead with a lot of their initiatives. So some of them might have webinars, virtual meetings, and some of them are focused on in-person meetings at ALA Annual, which is open to everybody. So feel free to attend. And I just wanted to give a shout out to another session that I'm convening, which is the leadership discussion group. And we're meeting at ALA Midwinter. And if you're attending, it's specifically focused on the transition from support staff to librarians. It's a discussion on career transitions with the perspective of librarians of color and how they work as paraprofessionals or support staff and then becoming librarians. And what are the perceptions, barriers, and opportunities. And I can share that link in the chat box. Next slide, please. And here are more information, and you're welcome to take a look at it to get a sense of whether this is something you're interested in participating, and you're welcome to reaching out to the current conveners and they could tell you more about it, and then you could possibly serve on the role in the next round. And then the policy and procedures manual, it's a great way to be more familiar with ACRL policies and communication practices. Next slide. And I'll pass it back to Rachel and Mary. Thanks.
Ray, thank you very, very much. And friends, thank you so much for being here in this conversation with us today. And I apologize for a little bit of that technical craziness that was halfway through. At this time, we would love to take some of your questions. I see that there have been questions that have been coming through and been answered, which I really appreciate. However, if you have questions after this point too, you can contact any of one of us who we're speaking today, but you can also contact Dawn Barron, who is the chair of our ACRL membership committee. Her email address is there. And then as a reminder, we will be asking you to do a survey when we send this out to you at a later time. But I'm gonna go back through and see if there's any questions that are still outstanding. And of course, the chat is on right now. Are there things that we can answer for you? And I invite my speakers, if you would like to hop back on to answer questions as well, you are certainly welcome to. Oops, and it looks like we have some. And Dustin looks like he has a question that may be for Peter. And the question was filling out the volunteer form for the instructions section and receiving the no reply at ala.org, as well as the section vice chair. Do we fill out the form again now that the official call is out, or are they done? Is this a done deal? Does Dustin need to do this all over again?
Sorry, Rachel, you cut out there briefly. The question is if the form,
Yeah, so the question is that Dustin already volunteered and has filled out the volunteer instruction form back in October for 2019 and received confirmation from both ALA, the ALA auto response, as well as from the section vice chair. But he would like to know if he needs to go back in and do this again now that the volunteer form is open.
No, it should not be necessary. The system will track all of the volunteer submissions that have come in, and the section chair-elect will get that list of names. So even though the official call only just went out now, anything that predated the call will be included as well.
Thank you. There is a question also from Barbara. I just saw, do you have to be a convener to be a member on a committee? I'm sorry, do you have to be a convener to be on a committee or just a general member? And that could be for any of our, for Mary or for Ray. And it looks like,
Hello, this is Mary.
yeah. Hi, Mary.
I will take a stab at that. My understanding is that you do not have to be a convener to be on a committee. In fact, those would be two separate roles. And part of, if we remember back to the beginning, we talked about no more than 3 volunteer opportunities simultaneously. So they'd actually be 2 separate things. That's my understanding.
Thank you. And then I see Deborah had asked a question about how much time weekly can that, does one expected to do some work on this? And Dominique, who is part of our committee, who's been working on this presentation, she makes a really great suggestion about reaching out to that current chair to learn more about the time commitment. And Ray also adds that it depends on the committee. So, you know, each committee is going to have a different sort of workload. And again, that reaching out and making those personal connections and asking for each one is the best way to go. Mary does add in, good, thank you. And Mary also reminds me to talk a little bit more loudly. Thank you, Mary. Interest groups and discussion groups don't have committees. They are just going to have somebody who's going to convene that. And then folks will join in to be a part of that. They will be interested in the thing that you are doing. I see Jane has asked, when the volunteer form asks about committees you've served on, does that refer only to ALA and ACRL committees? I always took that to mean academic library related committees. So I added also some of my state work that I have done as well into that form, because I believe that those, our state chapter work also ties into the work that I could be doing for ALA and ACRL. Do others have a different point of view on that?
No, I think this is Ray. I think that's a great point. Definitely if you're involved in different state chapters, but also some of the other affiliates may have academic library liaison and that kind of work. And I believe within your own university, if you've been serving on budget, for example, or some programming committee, that could also potentially be helpful.
Thank you, Ray. Yep, Dominique also says to definitely add that relevant committee work, anything that was relevant. Barbara, I see you also are asking about signing up for multiple committees, and this is an excellent question, I think. So what happens if you're accepted into more than one, but you really only have time for one? We ask that you then say that that you turn down the ones that you can't do. We would rather have you not sign up if you can't do the work. So if you get accepted into 2 and you're like, nope, really, it's just the one, do the one that you know you can give the time to. That would be the better way to go. Other questions? Yeah, I see that there's one from Taylor Lee. How much thought should you put into the info you submit on the form? And should it be something you revise, like a personal statement or something more off the cuff? Well, you know, that's a really great question, Taylor. My default when I do forms is to just be quick and to put things on there. And when I did that, when I first started, and I've been with ACRL for about 14 years now, 15 years, I now sit and I really think about what is it I'm trying to say. So over time, I've put more thought into it. And our colleague Dominique adds that she does do a revision every time she volunteers, really thinking about what committee do I really see myself on and what do I really see myself bringing? So selling it to that audience, the way Karen said, remembering who your audience would be. Oh, Ruth is asking, what are the committees looking for on those applications and how do you stand out? Wow, that is also a really good question. So the idea when, and again, I haven't served on the back end of this. This is just what I've learned over time. The folks who are looking at all of these are really trying to match you and your interests and who you are. And again, it's hard because it's, you know, on a form, to the needs of the committee. So you stand out the more the skills that you bring, the expertise, the more that you bring that matches to what the committee needs. Now, part of that, there is also, as several of our speakers have said, that it's great when you are doing other things outside of committee work. So if you are doing some scholarly work, maybe you're doing presentations, or you're doing some writing, or you've been attending presentations that others have been doing, and then, you know, making a point of meeting them and asking questions. That name recognition also helps. And again, that doesn't mean you have to be there in person. It could be following on listservs and engaging that way, or it could be being on webcasts like this and making sure you're asking the questions and getting your name out there. And that all of those things help. There are many things that help that.
Yeah, I totally echo Rachel's comment. This is Ray again. And in addition to that, adding the teamwork value, the collaboration, the ability to lead and be a self-starter, I think those are really important, because when you're serving on a committee, you're working in a team to meet the goals of that committee. And definitely that's something to keep in mind, because even though you're applying by yourself individually to stand out, you're still at the end working as a team.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Very much, very true. Other questions that we can answer for you today? I'm just giving it a moment in case there's anybody else. Well, that being the case, thank you once again, everyone who is on this webcast with us today. Again, if you have any questions following, you can contact Dawn Barrett, our chair of our committee. You can contact Mary Jane Petrosky, who is our ACRL staff person. You can contact me as well. We appreciate so much having this opportunity to get to know you, and we hope you got to know us and that you are ready to volunteer with us. We are ready to take you. We would love your assistance. And again, any questions that come up at a later time, please, please, please feel free to reach out. Again, this webinar, this webcast has been recorded and is being recorded, and so it will be sent out in a few days to anybody who's registered. We ask that you do work on the survey at that time and let us know how we can improve this for future webcasts. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you all of our panelists as well.